So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to join us on this very sunny, beautiful end of June day for our last edition of the Digital Food Series 2021 before the summer. Behind me, you see this what we have so far this year. We have in the last sessions, we've discussed with various companies, including Port of Amsterdam, Ahold Delhaize, to look at how digital transformation, due diligence, and the value of data plays in their business. So today we have a very interesting session to conclude this first half year on how to make sense of a mumbo jumbo of data and create value for sustainability in the animal husbandry industry. After the summer, so before I already go into the little advertisement for our session starting in September again, you'll see some already the themes. So stay tuned for the coming series. So to introduce myself, my name is Tiffany Tsui. I'm the co-host of the Digital Food Series. I'm a global strategist, consultant, and entrepreneur. Other than co-hosting the digital food platform, I'm also the co-owner and CSO of the Vertical Farm Institute. And we focus on developing ultra short chain and sustainable chain for cities, which is a different topic from the animal husbandry. I would like to also introduce our digital food team, Bianca von der Haar, you can wave, Senior Project Manager at Foodlog, and Dick Veerman. I don't know if Dick is joining us today. Today, together with the digital food team, we developed the concept of this series at the beginning of 2020 to focus on the theme of connect data, technology, and strategy, and connect people, ideas, and regions. So on that, today I'm really happy. We have one is very interesting topic, and today we have a quite an overwhelming registrants. I don't think everybody would join real time, but you always can watch back. But I counted more than 33 countries joining our session, registering for the topic. So really welcome. And I think it would be nice later if you can turn on the video, your camera can make a group photo. So maybe at the end of it, Bianca. So in the first half of this year, we focus on the use cases. And then the center of the use cases is to look at what is needed to create trust among connected players in the system, the agri-food system. How do we define value allocation models for providing data, transforming them, and applying information throughout the entirety of the food chain? This is also today's topic, is which is focusing on the animal industry. We have two great speakers today. David Nickel is Vice President of Global Sustainability Marketing and Business Development at DSM. David is an expert in animal nutrition. He has a PhD from the topic and a very experienced entrepreneur and expert in animal and nutrition. And second guest is Wilbert Hilkens. He is the founder of FoodInsights. He started FoodInsights in 2018. FoodInsights creates food supply chain solutions that connect food companies and people, that create impact and drive efficiency. So before we start today's topic, I would like to start with a poll question. Bianca, please. So the poll question is that in the recent episode of BBC podcast about the future of food, the program described a scenario that by 2040, the Netherlands, at least, has banned all animal production because meat production from cell tissues has become so efficient. So why do you still need animal? And so what I'd like to ask you, what do you think about this likelihood of this scenario? Because David and Wilbert and everyone, of course, we know what's now going on in the news today, the farmers' protests in the Netherlands, making news every day. We will not ask a poll question of your position on this, but the issue is indeed, why are we still talking about animal production? If, let's say, in 20 years, if that scenario is even likely, that we don't need animal anymore. Why do we need animal? Why do we even talk about sustainability from animal production if we don't need them?
Yeah, thanks, Tiffany. It's of course, it's a question a lot of people want answers to, but I think it's fair to say that the animal industry, yes, we have a large footprint, but we also have the ability to do something about it through the use of technology and really understanding the nuances of it. It's not just black and white, this discussion. Animal production farming is a vital part of the economy. It's a vital part of food systems. It's all about balanced diets, and animal protein is a key part of that. And also a very valuable part of society in terms of recycling and upcycling of waste streams into valuable protein. So I think it's a very complex topic, and we'll discuss that more, of course. But I think it should not be a polarized discussion by any means.
Okay, before you start your introduction, Bianca, let's see what our audience think about it, the likelihood of this scenario. Okay, so most people think it's unlikely, 60%. So that is a good start. This means very important. We talk about in a holistic way. So David, please.
Bianca, you want? Sorry, Tiffany. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
The signal broke then.
Yeah, the floor is yours. You can start with explaining this complex topic.
Yeah, it is a very complex topic, of course, and there are many moving parts to it. So everybody talks about decarbonisation or the value chains. Yes, we get that. Every industry has to decarbonise, you could say. But at the same time, it's also about the wider footprint. And in some geographies, nitrogen is a big topic. We know that in the Netherlands. We know the reasons why. But in other geographies, that's not the case. It's more like water. If you're in a water-stressed area, then the discussion really is about water. So it's highly, highly nuanced. And it varies across the species as well, from the ruminants, the cows and beef through to the monogastrics. So clearly there's a big demand for animal protein that will continue to grow. That's the expectations. At the same time, alternative proteins as well. So we believe there's more towards a mix of proteins available to the market, to consumers. But again, fitting with population growth. But it also means the greater adoption of technology. Technology innovation is there, which can make a substantial improvement to the footprint of animal production in those multiple domains. And that's the good news. And that's what we'll be talking about a bit more today. Okay,
so let's start with your presentation. Wilbert, you show
Yes, for a start, thank you for providing the opportunity to talk about our activities around decarbonization of animal produce, animal products in general. And as we just saw, even in 2040, we're still there with the consumption. But we're actually talking today about a pretty long title, and actually it is very much about getting carbon footprinting right in complex food value chains and dealing with suppliers and suppliers of suppliers, etc. Next slide. We talk about the greenhouse gas problem, and there are actually two solutions or two directions of solutions to it. First of all, of course, reducing the carbon footprint of the products we consume in general. And that is actually where the rest of the presentation will talk further about. And then the second direction is carbon capture, storing carbon in the ground or the trees. And that's not going to be the topic of today, but these are the two directions of solutions when you want to deal with the greenhouse gases in our globe. Next slide, please. And just what David mentioned already, it's not just about carbon. We believe that animal protein is part of a healthy, balanced diet. It's needed now in 2030 and even in 2040 in the Netherlands. But if you look worldwide, you see an increase of animal produce consumption of about 70%. And we just have to deal with that and to apply technology to make it better, to make it more efficient, and to make it better suiting for the population. And we talk about various issues here that we have to deal with. Water use, ammonia, biodiversity, greenhouse gas emissions, which will be the topic of today, energy use, phosphorus and nitrogen, of course, land use, and footprinting these issues, registering the data around it, calculating the right variables is extremely important to do that in the right way, and that is what we talk about. So we talk about carbon today, but the issue is a little bit broader, and we deal also with this range of topics. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we have to reduce. Decarbonization of the food system is challenging, and the reduction is about the product per kilogram, but the increase in animal produce consumption of 70% in the next decades has to be addressed as well. So we have to look for technology to improve it, make it better, and make it fit within the planet's boundaries. And that's complex because you are working with suppliers of suppliers, and suppliers of suppliers of suppliers that have to share data and that have to act coherently. So you have a complex and highly nuanced system, and we just can't simply work with global averages for various products. You have to look at farm level, what is happening there, and especially how can you influence the variation that we see there and make use of that variation. And here, the most pressing thing here is, of course, that time is against us. We have to act swift, and we have to act credible, and get all this data to monitor it in a proper way. Next slide, please. And then you have to measure properly, because if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. And that is actually what we do. You need to have a good tool set. You need to have the right databases and the methods around it, and especially the right understanding and the data that are required to fill in the gaps and the data to influence the variation that is out there, so we can make use of it and do that in a credible way. And then I can move to David.
Okay, thanks, Wilbert. So indeed, before David starts on the next session to talk about what to measure, the importance to know the numbers, I'd like to have our second poll question, which is about numbers. There are many, indeed, in the environmental indicators, water, biodiversity, nitrogen, but one of the actually most very important indicators is land use, so amount of agricultural land being used. According to FAO study, currently the land requirement of the globe's current diet average is 0.17 hectare per capita per day. So we need this much land to provide all the food we need. Whereas a completely vegan diet will require much less, 0.12 hectare per capita a day. So in our sessions, Wilbert and David, you talk about we need animal protein, but maybe more sustainable. So let's say a circular agriculture diet where animal protein, farm-grown animals still plays a part. What do you think the number will fall in this scenario? What is the number? So David, do you know the specific answer to this question?
I would say, no, perhaps not the specific answer, but I said less than 0.12.
Okay.
If you can adhere to the principles of circularity.
Okay, so I think that with a balanced diet is in fact better than a vegan diet.
If you're implementing technology and circularity and what have you, potentially, yes, potentially.
Do you think that's a knowledge known by the consumers? Because being a vegetarian and vegan is quite a fad in the developed countries. That it's better for the planet, and also how do you convey this to the consumers?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Tiffany, because it is a complex topic, complex debate, and a lot of it's been headlined, right? So with this, hey, it's better for the planet. Actually, what you're now starting to see, and you saw that recently, the UK advertising agency, Watchdog, which pulled up quite sharply Tesco's, for example, in their advertising around their plant chef based diets, where they did not have the data to support their claims. And the claims, talking about, hey, this is better for the planet, towards the consumer, which is confusing to the consumer. And quite rightly, the watchdogs are saying, hey, hang on, you need to have the data to make those claims. And obviously bringing that data is very important, because only then can the consumers actually understand or trust in what the marketing messages are. And I think that's a really important thing. Data that there is no greenwashing across the food system, right? So it's not about animal or vegan or plant, but it's about really making true comparisons, right comparisons. So I think that's is a key topic. It is very complex, as I said, and I think we're only at the start of this journey in trying to demystify a lot of this complexity.
So please start with your second part of the presentation as a scientist, tell us what are you working on in this field to make this complex question more understandable.
Okay. Can I have the slide, please? The next slide, please. Yeah, and I think to start this part of the discussion, you've got to look at the value chain. So I think it's about horizontal thinking in this whole topic, systems thinking, understanding the data, understanding what are the requirements of the value chain. And for most industries, we typically think vertically. We have our go-to contacts in the value chain where we supply into, but this is really about systems thinking and how to reduce the emissions. In this case, we're talking about carbon emissions. It's not just about carbon, of course, but let's just focus on that. And where does the problem sit? Well, if you look down the value chain, and you look at the retail sector, for example, more and more retailers are signing up to science-based targets. And this is about making commitments to carbon reduction in your value chain, and particularly in what are called Scope 3 reductions. And for a retailer, that means all the carbon coming into their store in the products they are purchasing. That's their upstream. So when you look at animal protein, then the vast majority of that, 90% of that upstream, those emissions are upstream on the farm. It's happening at the farm. And that's really important. So the farmer plays a very important role in helping to decarbonize this flow. What does that mean? It means that the retail sector, the downstream CPG companies, for example, very much including things like decarbonization and procurement discussions, working with the upstream supply base to make changes, implement technology that has a reduced footprint in the products that they are receiving. But they're also at the consumer end, testing the space for labeling, testing what we call green products or sustainably labeled products, and what is the willingness of the consumer to pay and to give them that choice. So this is a really important point, and it really is driving change in the value chain. Go to the next slide, please. And when we start talking about consumers, it's important to recognize that for all of us, our food consumption, what we're buying, has a major contribution to the footprint, to your individual footprint. Up to 30% of your carbon footprint is down to the food that you're purchasing and consuming. and that includes things like food loss and waste as well. It's recognized also as some work done a couple of years ago by a carbon trust across numerous countries, showing that 2/3 of consumers want to have a form of labeling. They talk about carbon labeling on foods so they can make a conscious choice and understanding that. There's been multiple studies looking at consumers' willingness to pay. And it's reckoned about 30% of consumers have that willingness to pay, up to around about 10% in value. But this is being tested as we speak in the retail chain. What we're seeing is actually a move towards labeling, which is based around full footprinting, full life cycle assessment. So that's taking about 16 different metrics, okay, which comes out of a life cycle analysis of animal protein, and converting that into a weighted score through some clever algorithms. And you get these eco-label footprints, and that takes into consideration carbon, but it also takes into consideration the impact on water, eutrophication, these sorts of things, biodiversity. So you get a more holistic score, and it's expressed in this system of A to E, green to red, and gives the consumer a much better understanding, contextual understanding of footprint. So you see this trend now starting to happen. Large companies along the value chain very much watching this space and getting involved. But all of this, of course, needs measurement, accurate measurement, and credible measurement. We move to the next slide, please. Interesting data from the US is showing that in the CPG market, the consumer packaged goods market, the growth is coming from those products that are credibly sustainability marketed. They represent about 16% of that marketplace, but they're actually driving about 55% of the CPG growth, and are able to attain significant price premiums over conventionally marketed products. So this type of data, what you're seeing in the markets, taking shape, playing out, is catching the attention of the food industry. And that means, right, okay, let's look at this. There's a cohort of customers who are prepared or want to have that choice. But again, to do that credibly, to avoid greenwashing and having your marketing checked, then you need to come up with the data. And that data is going to be life cycle assessments. Next slide, please. At the same time, we talked about, obviously, the retail side of things and consumer, but you're also seeing changes happening in the financial markets as well. So on the banking side of things, there's this focus on understanding what is your climate-related risk on the balance sheet. There is a shift towards more green financing, sustainability-linked loans, for example, which are increasingly more KPI'd around carbon. So again, accurate measurement of carbon is important for banks going forwards. At the same time, the whole Pillar 3 requirements of banking are tightening up around the whole ESG aspects. And it's known that if a company that's doing well by doing good and getting a high ESG score actually does benefit from a lower cost of capital and debt. So it's in the interest of many companies to get into their own data, create their own footprinting, understand where they are. And at the same time, the insurance companies, typically following the big financial companies, are looking at how to assess climate-related risk in their underwriting. And that will also impact animal production going forwards. So the whole financial market environment is also moving towards greater disclosure, transparency, and credibility in terms of footprint. And not just the footprint itself, but also what are you going to do about it to reduce your footprint. Next slide, please. So that really means, understanding and taking charge of your own footprint. And that means using, as Wilbert showed, really advanced footprinting tools and services to be able to do that. You take ownership of your own footprint. And that in itself is a great business diagnostic. It enables you to really understand what's working well, what's not working so well in your own business, if you're in the farming business. You can implement best practice. So if you have an array of farms, say, 1,000 farms or even 100 farms, you can understand which farms have a low footprint, which don't. It helps you understand where to direct your capital for improvement, where you don't need to spend your money. Typically, we find that a farm with a big footprint is inefficient in some way. there's leakage in the system. So we can highlight those hotspots and tighten that up. And that, of course, increases in efficiency, lead to improvement on bottom line. So again, very good business diagnostic. And of course, once you get hold of your footprint, you have a greater position to engage with your downstream and explore also branding opportunities, labeling opportunities. So it's really a very valuable approach to business, and it's certainly the direction of travel going forwards. And it's getting down to your own primary data in particular. Why, for example, would you want to be judged on average data, industry average data, or global data? If you're a progressive customer or progressive business, you're investing in the right technology and you have a substantially lower footprint. So it's really within your interest to take hold of your own footprint. Next slide, please. I think that was over to Wilbert.
And then you might ask yourself, okay, how is this working? And we have all these goals in Copenhagen, Paris, Glasgow. They're translated to national level, from national level via the industry tables to the main industries. And for food, there was a challenge laid on the table of retailers. And these retailers soon realized, oh, hold on, we can't influence too much of the footprint we're having. So they looked to their supplying processors and packers to give them a hand in, well, first monitoring what was happening at all. But then second, and it's what we're going to talk about further, is how can you really influence the footprint? So how can you reduce the footprint? And there you have to look at farm level, where a lot of the variation is taking place, farm and within farms and integrators. And then if you look at farm level, who are the ones that are really influencing the footprint with the technology, and who are developing the technologies? And then you look to the feed additive producers, especially in the longer run, the genetics companies, the equipment providers, and the animal health firms that do have a big impact on farm level. Next slide, please. And important here is to understand the scope 3 part that was mentioned, because you have to relate to your supplier and the supplier of your supplier, and even his or her supplier. If we look to farm level, a lot of the magic around sustainability is happening there. And then especially on the feed level, where about 50 to 60% of the costs of production are in the feed. But here is also the major impact on the carbon footprint per kilogram produced. And there you see what is important. Influencing the feed is all about the nutrition part, and to understand the diet and to balance the diet better, but also to measure accurately and credibly what is happening at farm level. And then not just in a year or in a quarter, but at batch level, because that is where you can have an influence and really lead farms and supply chains to improvement. Next slide, please. And how do we do that? That's with a combination of monitoring and decision support. Because first you have to understand what is happening. What is happening in the feed? What is happening at the farm? What is happening on the processing side and the packing side? To bring these data together from the various data sources. Create product passports out of it, and do two things. And one is to calculate LCAs with them. But second, and that is important also, to understand the cost structure. So what is happening, and bring that into a monitor. And then second, once that has taken place, the retailer and the processor, and they will say, yeah, well, let's have a look at what is happening here and how can we influence the reduction. So which technologies are available to reduce the carbon footprint. And with the technology providers, the intervention providers, as how we call them, you want to understand what is the impact of the various technologies, what are the costs, and what is the return on applying these technologies, and bring that together. So that means that they can influence the requirements of the supply chain from downstream further up in the value chain. And for this, of course, you have to bring the data together and make them flow. Next slide, please. And then we go to David again.
Yeah. I think you're on mute, Tiffany.
Before we start with your part, I think let's take a little break. We had asked a question. So, Wilbert, did you know the answer to that question? You talked a lot about numbers. What is what's your answer to the last full question?
Lower than 0.12.
And why that is?
So
why is that?
Because we're with applying the animal produce, you can make use of a part of the value of plant produce, which is not usable for humans. So you're increasing the value, and you're making better use of the nutrients that are available.
Okay, well, let's do our.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, Dick.
What is the source of 0, 1, 2? So what is the source of that answer?
That's research by Wageningen University based on completely vegan diet. So it is really complete report. But let's see the answer, Bianca. Okay. So we have 50-50 in your consumer base. You need to educate, let's say, that indeed the answer is actually a circular agriculture diet will be between 0.8 and 0.11, so lower than 0.12. There's a range because, of course, the circular, that difficulty is more complex. It's easier to say it's completely vegan, so no animal at all. But when you talk about you have to recycle, you have to track things, it's more complex. But the conclusion is indeed when you can use rest streams, especially become a complete ecosystem, it is more environmentally sustainable to go with the circular diet. So also vegans, vegetarians, pay attention for better for the planet to continue support best practice food, animal production, right? But there's of course a number of questions in your presentation, David and Wilbert. You also talked about a new certification, a new labeling, the Enviro score, which actually to me also new because in this series we talked about a number of standards according to a sheet by Dick earlier. There's 400 labeling already. You have the Nutri-Score, you have a Planet Score. Now you introduce a new Enviro score. Are you not adding more confusion? How do you see this?
Now we'll get back to that later in the presentation, Tiffany. So if you have a moment, we'll give you the answer.
Okay, great. So let's let David start with the last part of the presentation then.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so leading on from where Wilbert left off, it really is about data. You saw the previous slide, which talked about how data needs to connect. In the ag business, in animal production, it is a rather disaggregated data space. But the trend is towards aggregation. And there's a lot of people, a lot of companies working in that to collect data, to make sense of data, and turn that into valuable insights and allow that data to flow through the value chain. What's really important is transparency and credibility. I mentioned it before, but it really is important. Again, to avoid greenwashing, really to make sure that you can unlock that value from sustainability. It starts on the left-hand side of this chart. This is about assured data. So this is about having around the products, for example, going into animal feed, the environmental product declarations. So what are the life cycle inventory data around a particular product, around a particular raw material that goes into the feed? The use of greater use of primary data rather than, say, secondary data, and using credible databases such as GFLI and AgriFootprint, for example. As I said, the data ecosystem, it is fragmented, but it is consolidating. But they also have to respect data privacies as well. Feed is a very important part of the footprint of animal production. You heard that earlier from Wilbert. Up to 80% or more of the footprint of animal production is related to feed, and a lot of that's down to what's in the feed, and that's the feed recipes. Okay, so to ask for access to feed recipes, which is the domain of the feed industry, is proprietary information. So you have to be aware of that, protect that part of the industry, but it's a very important part of the analysis. And then we talk about who owns the data at the end of the day. So respecting data ownership. A lot of the data is coming from the farm, the footprint of the animal's growing on the farm, and you're taking raw data, you're turning that into data insights. So who has the ownership of those insights versus the raw data? And typically the farmer owns a lot of that. Okay, but it also means that you start to get more data insights, which can be very useful for associated suppliers into that value chain. You're identifying opportunities for improvement, for more business creation. And that leads to, of course, partnerships, perhaps partnerships which weren't already in existence, new partnerships which tap into that data and create more value along the value chain, and particularly also about how much of that value can actually go back to the farmer and help the farmer in terms of their business. Okay, so it's a very interesting development in this whole data arena. Go to the next slide, please. So what are we doing about it? Well, in DSM, we've been working on a solution called Sustel. It's what we say is sustainability intelligently applied. And this is using the latest protocols and calculation methodologies to calculate the footprint in detail of animal protein production across species. So across the broiler, layer, swine, dairy industry, also now the salmon industry, moving into beef and also shrimp industry. It allows us to scale and be able to really collect a lot of data and analyze that from a technical point of view, but also translate that into business meaning for our clients. Move to the next slide. How does it work? Well, the important thing is that the whole system is ISO assured by DNV, an accreditation body, and that's really important. Again, it comes back to credibility. It's about verified data input. So if it's bad data going in, you get bad data coming out, of course, of the system. So very much important that the data going in is assured. Sustel itself does the LCA calculation very fast, so it allows very fast turnaround and feedback and understanding of what's going on at farm level. It also allows you to play or run what I say is what-if scenarios. So what if I change this, or what if I change that? And you get immediate results. You can compare and contrast between different interventions, whether it's nutritional or whether it's actually to do with farm infrastructure, change, for example, change of manure handling. And you can then get a much better understanding of how and what needs to be done before you actually start spending money. So you do that analysis, that business insight. From that, of course, once you run those numbers, you're getting ISO assured results. And those ISO assured results, compliant to the 14,000 and 44 series, means then you can also look to the right-hand side of this chart about sustainability claims. Your data quality also needs to be up to scratch to unlock value in labeling schemes, for example. Your GHG accounting, the finance side of things, and ESG reporting. Go to the next slide, please. So we talk about measurement, but as we said, it's about measurement combined with ways to make improvements. And so it's about best practices and precision and data, precise use of data. We know that within the system, if you look at this chart on the left-hand side, this is FAO Glean work, which was done some time ago, but it really does illustrate the nuance we're talking about. That some of the leading farms in these different species have significantly lower footprints compared to, say, an average. And if we're able to implement best practice across a large number of farming businesses, then you can make some substantial gains in terms of footprint. But implementation of best practice is one thing, but it also means sometimes a bit of a paradigm shift in the types of technologies being used. There's a lot of technology already available, particularly in the nutrition space. And again, nutrition being a fundamental part of reducing the footprint of animal protein. If you're not focused on nutrition, then you really are, I'd say, playing in the weeds as such in terms of carbon reduction. Now, how do you do this? Okay, it's about getting more out of less, productivity gains, so improving the lifetime performance of the animal on the farm, reducing mortality and morbidity, and reducing wastage in that system. On the other hand, it's about improving nutrient utilization from the diet. So getting, again, more out of less is the basis of feed enzyme business, for example, and eubiotics and improved gut health, so the animal can actually retain more nutrients. We talk about, for example, nitrogen utilization efficiency, a key term. We talk about that the animal retains more of that nitrogen and releases less to the environment. So you really get more out of less. And of course, the big drive to alternative raw materials, whether that's things like insect meal or single cell proteins, but particularly circular use of byproducts, and how we can upgrade those and make those more digestible and usable by our farmed animals. And a big one, which is certainly is not the last, tackling enteric methane production is a big one. And over a third of methane production on the planet is coming from agriculture, principally from enteric methane, from ruminants, dairy and beef. And there, tackling that is imperative, particularly if the world wants to stay on the trajectory of the 1.5 degree temperature change. And there you have the latest technologies like Bovaer, for example, which makes a significant reduction in dairy cattle, a minimum of 30% methane reduction, up to 90% in beef. So this is fundamental, transformative technology that can make turn animal production into a success story and change the way people look at things. If you move to the next slide, please. Importantly, every farm is different and there's big variation out there. This is some work, again, Glean work, which shows the difference in the footprint of a kilo of milk based on the farm size. And each dot represents a country. So within each dot, there's a lot of variation as well. But as you can see, talking global averages really does not make much sense. Okay, and you can understand why a farmer in the Netherlands will get frustrated when he's compared to a global average. They have a much lower footprint on milk production on a kilo of milk compared to a global number. And then down at individual farms, there are differences as well. So it's really about tailoring technology to the farm, understanding your own footprint, and then having the right direction to make improvements in. We go to the next slide, please. When you start to combine measurement with interventions, and you can see the type of roadmap to reduction that can be achieved. This is some work we did, and it's based on Gouda cheese in the Netherlands, and starting off with a conventional cheese and comparing conventional Gouda cheese, how you can reduce your footprint. Importantly, you must recognize the boundaries of the system. Okay? So it covers everything from improving the productivity on farm, suppressing methane emissions, as we just talked about, but also reducing wastage. You know, in the dairy system, mastitis is a big problem in high-producing dairy herds, where you need to treat that animal, then you'll be using antibiotics. Well, the cow will continue to produce milk, but you can't put that milk into the value chain. There's a withdrawal period, and that milk will be wasted. Well, that waste will actually mount up on the carbon footprint of the product that you are selling, that you are bringing to market. So again, making those reductions has a direct impact on the footprint. You get then into the factory where you're making cheese, well, not all cheese wants to be, you don't want all your cheese to be moldy. Some cheeses, yes, some not, of course. So inhibiting mold and cutting losses and reducing the loss and waste in that part of the system and extending the shelf life of biopreservatives, ensuring that we have less loss and waste at the consumer level is really important. You start to look at, this is just an example of some of the interventions, it's not all the interventions that are already in existence, available. These are proven technologies which have a very strong return on investment for the user. But when you start to put this together in a coherent form, you can see the type of reductions we're looking at. In this example, over 35% reduction. Now, bear in mind, the dairy industry has a net zero commitment by 2050, so reducing emissions to zero over that period. Typically, like most industries, there's a midway point of a 30% reduction by 2030, something along those lines. But I think the nice thing here is that you can see technology that comes into play and can actually get an industry a long way forward. And this is really important, Tiffany. I'd just like to add, if you look at things like the dairy industry, 80% of the population has dairy in their diet in one form or another. It's a staple part of a balanced, healthy diet. And so it's very important in this type of industry that we can really transform it into a low footprint, a highly sustainable industry. Okay, a lot to do, but it shows you the type of direction that can be achieved. We go to the next slide. And this is the last slide. And of course, through this roadmap of being able to measure and bring interventions to bear to actually make tangible and measurable reductions, then of course, you can start opening up these opportunities to the consumer. And you talked about the consumer earlier on. The consumer then starts to get reliable information, which is based around the evolving standards coming out of the European Commission, translated into scoring systems like EnviroScore. I would like to add, this is not a system that DSM or FoodInsights is developing. These are developed by independent research institute. This one, for example, is the ASTI Institute down in Bilbao, Spain. But it then brings that contextual footprint information onto pack and helps powering consumers to conscious choice. So you can see how the system is primed and set up to make improvements, and how this whole approach should be played out horizontally through the value chain, creating value along that chain for the farmer all the way through to the consumer. And I think that's it. Next slide. Yes, I think that's we finished there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. So, Bianca, when we still have our audience, we start a discussion before everyone has to go. Let's invite everybody to turn on your camera, and then we have a nice group photo together to mark the last session with a very well-attended audience. So everybody, we actually start with our discussion now. So if you please turn on your camera if you want to join. And also with the questions, because I already have a lot of questions. Also, we have different geographies and different industries. So would really love to hear your comments about today's session. Bianca, are we ready to make a picture already, or are we? Okay. So let everybody count to 3 and everybody wave. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So, all right. Questions, inviting. Also, maybe I start. Actually, Wilbert and David, you presented today's story as a coherent whole from a solution provider and a big multinational companies and scientists. But Wilbert, in our earlier session, we also talked about a story, the art or the value of a storytelling. And you also said, at least maybe in Europe, in Holland, that the consumers do not put their wallet where the mouth is. So people say, I would like to see developing countries get fairly paid. I would like to see environmental being protected. but how much are you really willing to pay? And that doesn't really translate. So if I would ask you, Wilbur, now take a position, kind of the other position from David, how do you see this? From that point of view, how do you convince consumers? If you see that David has research from the US, maybe in some market, people are more likely to pay for a premium product, maybe not in Europe. What's needed? And because you mentioned already last time, number of challenges. So if you take that, what are the challenges to make this work, this new Enviro score, and then to get value out of the sustainability practice?
For a start, it's not that the consumer is not paying for it. There is a variation also in the population of consumers, and a part of the consumers is willing to pay for a better product. Moving to better standards is important here, and a part of the consumers is willing to pay a better price if they can influence the improvement and the quality of the products they're buying, and when that is science-based. And so when we can underpin it with numbers. But yeah, there is a majority that has a much lower interest. So it's more about which part of the market are you focusing on. And in the presentation, you saw also the figure of David, and with the percentages in the US, you see that especially this part of the market is driving the value over the past years. So there is an interest for the retailer, the processor, and the farmers to focus on that part. So yes, there is an opportunity in the market. But apart from that, there is a challenge, a collective challenge, to reduce the footprint of the goods we're producing, and that's a separate challenge. So in the end, you create different markets, but overall, the market is forced to improve and to adopt technology for the reduction of the footprint.
Actually, I will come back to my earlier question, which is a topic we address multiple times during our session, is that there's too many standard or labeling, that ultimately when there's a true digitization in the agri-food chain, they would lead to harmonization, meaning you have to reduce the number of labeling to become a few or one. Or looks like the European sustainability labeling one, like this Enviro score, could be the one, but yet at the same time, there are a number of competing scores. So what's new? And from your presentation, I think the one subject very nicely you've paid attention to is the role of banks, the ESG labeling. But how does that really relate then? How do you make additional incentive from driven both by the regulatory drive, by ESG, by EU taxonomy, by investment, same time informing consumers and make this new score, D score, let's say? How do you see that?
Shall I take that one? And well, there are a lot of labels, and I think there will remain a lot of labels out there. But in the end, also here, the quality of the labels is evolving. And the quality of the labels that are doing the best and are making the best proof of the underlying work, and they will survive in the end. And there are a lot of labels out there that use general numbers, which is okay for a start, but not good enough to move further. And if you really want to show what you're doing, you need to have science-based labels that are using the numbers underneath. So that is one thing. But second, you want to have a cooperation also with that is also working on the impact of improving also on that label. So underlying, you want to have an improvement also there. And labels will choose in their cooperation for partners that facilitate it.
You have anything to add, David?
Yeah, I agree with Will, but there's a lot of labels out there. I think it's about 450 or so, as you mentioned, over 400. But ultimately, what we're seeing, regulators are also clamping down on sustainability claims, right? So, and here they're saying you've got to have the data. And there's several examples already in the public eye where people have been pulled up short on what they're saying, because it confuses consumers, all right? So I think, yes, the trend is towards full, in this type of labeling, this area of labeling, of course. And there are different labels, right? I mean, there's welfare labels, which we're not talking about here. We're talking about the environmental footprint, you could say. And they are very much going towards full life cycle analysis. And that's important because, again, if you're a progressive producer, you know, and you've made the right investments and you do have a low footprint, then you want to be recognized accordingly. You want it science-based. Why would you want to be judged on a category level, you know, or an industry average? You want to be using your own data. And if your data is of good enough quality, that your data quality indicators are good, then you're qualifying for these types of labeling schemes, then you can see how this would play out. It brings confidence to the consumer, etc. But I think it's only one part, as you say, there's only one part of it. It's one area where there's potential to create value. We mentioned, you asked the question about the finance sector, and it's clear, yeah, the move is towards more, let's say, a net zero loan book over time, the tightening up of Pillar 3 obligations in the banking sector from the central banks, which has a large environmental component in it. And again, it'll come down to, you know, tightening up of metrics, science-based metrics as well. And yeah, there's the move towards improved finance conditions for those companies who've got their act together. And then, of course, there's the overall regulations of the industry itself. Your ability to operate will become increasingly under pressure, as we see in many markets. So I think it's, you know, footprinting, being on top of your own data, it leads to many ways of creating value, you know, and safeguarding your business.
Do you see, you have a number of questions from the audience, also invite them, but that's from a DSM point of view, do you see yourself being the new glue to bring retailers, banks, and governments and consumer together?
Well,
with data?
I wouldn't say we're the glue. There's a lot of moving parts. As a company, we play right across the nutrition space. So we're in quite a good position from the farming side of things all the way through the human business. And that is the DSM business. It's a full nutrition player. So we do get a lot of insights. We have a lot of connectivity through the value chain, but it's not just down to us. We do not believe it's one person or one company. We believe in open innovation, creating partnerships. You saw that in a previous slide. And that's what it takes. It really does take that to happen. And that means, thinking a little bit different, being open to share, respecting data privacy, these sorts of things, and implementing change. And there's a lot of innovation there which can help the food system to improve.
There's a question from Dick on that. Dick, would you like to elaborate? You have to unmute yourself.
Unmute myself. Yes, there I am. I need to click. Yes, so I think it's highly commendable what you're doing. Someone has to do it. And in this whole series, we've been talking about the responsibility of someone taking on the basic taxonomy and the data model. Now, you are doing it. The FIFAC has been doing it with the GFLI that was in your slides. But indeed, I would like to ask the question, are you in the ingredients business or are you in the data business? Because in the end, being in the data business gives you a very powerful position. So what is your position on being in the data business? Because you will be there. And how are you going to develop your position as a data farmer?
Yeah, thanks, Dick. Great question. Going forward, it's all about precision, right? And how to get more precise, get better use of resources, reducing footprint. Is this precision? It's data. So inevitably, you're going to be moving in that direction. We all are going to be handling more data than we used to really move the needle and be much more sustainable. As a company, we see data as an integral part of our future. We have our precision and personalization leg of our business across not just animal, but our human nutrition business as well. So we see it going hand in hand with our traditional business, our nutrition business. So yeah, it's not one or the other. These things go hand in hand.
You needed to stay there.
Absolutely.
Right, thank you.
I have another question from Ruud van Dijk. Ruud, if you're still there, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself and elaborate on your comment and question.
Hi, my name is Ruud van Dijk. I'm a pig farmer from the Netherlands.
Oh, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Since 8.5 years, I look my pig farm from a different perspective, and I want to show people what the role of animals is in our feeding system. And many years I want to.
You can speak Dutch if I understand.
Yeah,
I'll translate.
I have to. 8.5 years, I have a challenge with the retail to get. Ik weet niet precies hoe ik het moet zeggen.
Gewoon Nederlands, dan kan ik hem vertalen.
Oh, oké, dat is goed. Om ze te overtuigen om de lat hoger te leggen, zeg maar. En ik zie daar toch wel heel veel kansen in, omdat de retail zich heeft gecommitteerd om ook zichzelf meer sustainable in te gaan kopen, zeg maar. Dus de enigste manier waarop zij dat kunnen bereiken is ook die boer die dat wil doen, of de keten die dat wil doen, om dat te bereiken. Daarbij te betrekken, zeg maar.
Yeah. How to reach the retail? How do you make sure this value is translated to farmers? Wilbur, maybe you can also elaborate on the question if I understand.
Yes, for me it's easier to
no problem.
Questions than react on questions for you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, thanks.
Reaching the retailer starts with cooperating with the processor and packer, and to move the bar. Exactly is what you say, but it starts with the conversation. How they can be helped to raise the bar on, for example, carbon, is what we're talking about today, or to create a label, or to create a new segment that is suiting the needs of their clients, because they will never ask you to raise the bar when they do not have clients for it. So you have to work throughout the value chain to raise that bar and to increase the need for those products.
Yes.
We have a question also.
It starts with talking and a lot of talking, but you have to create a common understanding and a common goal. That's a start.
Am I allowed to step back in, Tiffany?
Yes, please.
The other day, now Ruud is disappearing. The other day we had Hans Blonk. He is the foremost LCA analyst of the Netherlands. He's behind the screens, behind the GFLI as well. And he told us that in pig farming, 80% of CO2 emissions actually is out of sight of national policies. So indeed, you can reach for the retailer, but the retailer isn't rewarded by national policies. Now we're talking here to DSM as an international, as a multinationally operating company. What is your view on carbon being rewarded in the eyes of the consumer only at a national level, whereas the labels should be international? And that is right, because it is all scope 3. In farming is scope 3, and pig farming is in part scope 3. So what is your vision on this? Should there be a discussion with the EU, at least, to do something at an EU level and not just at a Dutch or a French or a German or a Danish level?
I think we have to start small, and when we have success, we can develop it further we can copy that to other retailers and other farmers. But we have to start small, I think, with good best practices, and then we can show the world what the secret is, and they can follow.
So your story, Ruud, need to be also heard more, also at the starting small in the Netherlands, in the Dutch politics, in the consumer space, and it's not a completely polarized, right? I mean, we have this current situation to deal with, and if you are not really involved in all the details, you can easily get a very polarized view on what's happening. Right. So that's something also Wilbur and David can comment. How do we apply in the real situation? Indeed, you can talk about very big scheme, international EU, or do you start with what we have now? We have this problem we have to solve tomorrow.
Yeah, I think what's really important is best practice, of course, and showing that it is possible to scale this in value chains. As I said, we believe it is possible. It obviously takes time. This is not just to push the button and everything changes. But the point is, systems are coming into place, standards of measurement, and you would have heard that from Hans blog in a previous meeting. These standards, of course, have developed over time. They're now in a position where you can run the analysis. And it is an ecosystem, a system thinking approach. So this all joins up in terms of EU green policy, Green Deal, etc. So it's end-to-end thinking as such. So it really is about being able to scale that reliably, incredibly, and to make that difference. And as you know, Dick, these are very complex supply chains as well. So it's not say simply a national level. There are national commitments, of course, but food supply chains, as you well know, cross many boundaries and borders. So it is a very holistic approach you have to take.
Indeed, and it is international. I think we have one ex-retailer lady in the room, Simone Herzberger. So Ruud, what you are proposing is make an example and show it. And for example, Albert Heijn could set the example and say, hey, we are moving beyond our national boundaries here. And I know that Melanie Merck is in the room as well. She is in fresh food chains. Perhaps she could comment on this as well. So how to make scope 3, which is usually outside of the Netherlands, visible? That would be my question. So Tiffany, if you allow me,
yes, please
bring in Melanie and Simone, if they want to, obviously.
Yeah.
I can
Hello,
see
welcome,
Melanie.
Melanie. Yes.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Well, are you now asking me to get the resolution of a very big problem in just 1 second?
It's part of your job.
Yes.
So it's hard to get that in internationally. Yeah, so I think coming back to what David said, it's really about a lot of partnerships and collaboration that is needed. And I think that's, unfortunately, that is not all about tech. It's also about partners and organizations willing to work together. And basically what we see is that happens when, the bigger forces in the value chain actually start moving. And so then other forces start moving as well. And so basically that is about retail taking up a big part of that chunk. And in addition to that, if you bring it back to the source, which is often the farmer, you should make sure that you lower every threshold you have in getting actually getting the data in and getting things done. So basically, do not let's say ask them to invest heavily just before they even start. And investing heavily, what I mean is to actually be able to gather the data. So in a couple of projects I'm in, it's basically trying to tap in as much as possible on existing infrastructure and existing ways of getting the data in, and then you will at least have a start. And I also heard start small and then expand. So I'm totally in favor of that, because if you don't, you will probably not move forward anyway. So.
Simone, would you like to add to that?
Well, retailers, the retail business is in fact the consumer business. So whatever the consumer desires, the retailer will try to deliver, which means that heavily investing in data management and so on, the retailer will only do that if there is a strong demand from the consumer market. At the moment, this is really troublesome because of inflation, the prices that are rising. What you see at the moment is that although consumers are very concerned about the environment, they drop this concern a little bit in favor for a cheaper priced product. On the other hand, there is a concern, and to fulfill the needs of consumers, my opinion is that the labeling, and we have seen an excellent example from the speakers now, the labeling will be an important tool to handle the data and work with the data in favor for consumers.
Thanks, Simone. We also like to have some remark. Indeed, you mentioned international. We have a lot of international registrants today. In our audience, Cho Ji-jun, I think you're from South Korea, from your name. If you're still with us, would you like to introduce who you are and what's your perspective? Cho. Are you still here?
Yeah, I'm from Korea. And,
okay, welcome.
Yeah, sorry, today is my off day, so
no problem. You look good.
Sorry. yeah. Actually, in Korea, our government interested in the carbon footprint continuously. And the end users also has interest in the environment as well. But when the meat producer would like to reduce carbon emission, in that case, they need more money. And they should invest a lot by themselves, supported by the government and the value chain. So I like our Sostel because we should go to the more environment or natural friendly the industry. But to go there, we should touch with all value chains. Means consumers should pay their money more to get some environment friendly the meat or the byproduct. But we have a lot of value chains, so we should touch with the supermarket or the meat processor and all of the steps. So in that case, we need some. We want to know the best practice from other countries, because it will take so long time, I think. Yeah.
So I understand you are working for DSM in South Korea, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have a team, David, internationally now actually developing Sustel as an international product, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. We operate across all markets and all species, and have been for some time engaged with working with customers in this domain.
Yeah, so it sounds from Cho's point of view that it's also asking for global support in best practice cases to help also different countries to bring this value together, right?
Yeah, I think the beauty is there's no one case the same, right? So I say it's a highly nuanced industry. It's complex, and of course you learn working with one client versus another in different countries and different species, and you see there's a lot of difference. So you have to tailor accordingly. You have to be really flexible and agile, and to help the customers based on what their needs are. We've had some customers where it's, hey, I need to have the information, otherwise I can't get the release of money from the bank for my next investment. Others saying I need it because I'm getting a lot of scrutiny from my ESG investors. Others saying, hey, nationally there are schemes for carbon crediting and what have you. So it really depends where in the world and where and what the client's needs are.
Yeah, I have another question from Lisanne Stedig. If you are still with us, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself and elaborate on your question. Lisanne?
Yes,
yeah, hello.
Thank you. Hi, thanks. Yes, so my name is Lisanne Stedig. I'm from the Dutch Society for Protection of Animals. And I was wondering if DSM is aiming for the lowest possible carbon footprint, as I got a bit from the presentation, or do you view it as just one part of the bigger picture of sustainability of animal production systems? Because sometimes you could have maybe a lower animal product consumption and then a higher footprint per product may be less of an issue and sometimes even necessary. For example, the transitions that's going on now in the Netherlands to the slower growing broiler chickens, which have a higher carbon footprint, but have also much better animal welfare. This seems to be a conflict, but of course, within that system of slower growing broilers, you can also have a look at reducing carbon footprint by maybe using other feedstuffs, but you will probably not reach the same level as conventional broilers, of course. And I think the same goes for dairy cattle, that you could aim at the highest possible production and the lowest CO2 footprint per kilogram of product, but you could also look at other systems where the cows give less milk per year, but maybe have a longer longevity, better animal welfare, etc. So I was just wondering, what's your opinion on that?
Yes, thanks, Lisanne. That's a great question, and it is complex. You described it very well. So welfare is a very, very important part of it, of course. About that, but if we're talking about footprint, then clearly the ambition is to help our customers get to a lower intensity per kilo of product. But of course, there's other considerations to take into play. If consumption keeps going up and up and up, then the overall footprint of animal production is still going to be big, right? And I think it's I think the GDP Global Dairy Platform had some nice data showing from 2005 to 15. Consumption went up 30% globally, worldwide on dairy products or milk. They were able to reduce the intensity of carbon emissions per kilo of milk by 11%, but because of the increased consumption, then the overall footprint of dairy went up 18%. So it comes to your point about consumption. And I think some of the consumption patterns are changing in different parts of the world where there's a reduction in animal protein consumption. I think if I remember correctly, in the UK, consumption of animal protein has reduced about 19% over the last few years. In other parts of the world, of course, it's increasing. Populations coming from a low intake, becoming more affluent and including more animal protein in their diet. And that's, for many people, it's very important to have a more balanced diet. So we take a global view on this and of course apply the technologies to it is as I keep saying, a very nuanced industry. And as you described in Northwest Europe, with slower growing chickens, it's a bit of a dilemma, because there's the welfare angle clearly, but the footprint on a kilo basis changes. It's not as sustainable from those numbers compared to a conventionally raised bird. I think this is the we come to a happy medium, an equilibrium, which helps to hopefully serves all purposes. But our approach is really, to bring the best technology to the appropriate, appropriate technology to the different parts of the industry. That's our approach.
Thanks. Can I react to it? Or
yes, please.
Yeah. Well, I think it's correct that globally the consumption is of course increasing, but I think even without the lower consumption argument, it's still very interesting to have a look at. I think my worry is that sometimes only the primary production is taken into account. For example, for the broilers, only the broiler production stage is included and not, for example, the parent birds. And if you include them, then the difference in CO2 footprint is already, it's still higher for the slower growers, but the difference is smaller because the mothers are smaller and they eat less, for example. And I think for dairy, if you look at completely different systems where you also fatten the older dairy cows and then replace maybe, what do you say? I can't think of the correct word, but the meat cows, the beef cows. So yeah, I think it's about looking at the whole system and not only part of the production chain. That's
fully agree, and that's exactly what we do with Sustel. You totally agree with you. You must take a systems approach. It's not one moment in time per se. You must look at everything. And as you quite rightly described, whether it's a slightly lower productivity cow, but the cow staying on the farm longer, more lactation, an older cow producing more milk, less lameness, less issues like that. Actually, perhaps a more productive system. This is how to make the right balance. But understanding the numbers, first and foremost, helps you understand what to balance, what interventions to make. And I think that's what we're talking about. Let's help the value chain get on top of the numbers and see what is the right thing to do. And then take your decisions on how productive the system should be and what sort of interventions and inputs are needed.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lisanne and David. So we have come to about the last few minutes of the session. I would like to also still to think back on our previous sessions of how our discussion today relate to the discussion we had with, for example, Westford, which is a slaughterhouse collecting data from pig farmers. We had the Ahold Delhaize, which is carrying out the due diligence assessment for their product categories. We had Port of Amsterdam, which is involved in the transport and storage of feed, of Cargill, who's behind developing of the GNLI databases. But the impression, at least, is this development, big players are still working on your own. So that's also an interesting discussion from Sustel or David. How do we then connect, for example, with Westford, what they're doing? They're also developing dashboard and data, and they're collecting a number of information. And there are a number of databases all there. And there are different technologies, true code of other sort of automation. How are this, in the end, system that players can some point come together to start exchanging practice and exchanging APIs, and so that it's not, doesn't matter if it's called Nutri-Score and Barrow score, if the data underneath are credible, right? That's the goal in the end.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tiffany. So we look to where we've been working is hooking up APIs into feed ERP systems and farm management systems to again simplify the flow of data, and that's really important going forwards because kind of hand cranking data into systems that kind of self-declared may not be sufficiently assured enough to unlock value going forwards, right? So obviously system connectivity is a big plus, and that's an area we are actively working on. And that also helps to scale as well. If you're taking from thousands of farms into a value chain, right? So that's the area of development, I would say. I think when it comes down to calculations, and you would have heard this from Hans Blanc in the previous call, then it's all about internationally recognized standards, the appropriate standards in the appropriate geographies. You must be compliant with those and using the latest standards and protocols for calculation. Absolutely. There has been a much more a sort of a move towards commonality there, which is great news. That's really good. So people are using the right methodologies, particularly in the European Union with the PATH guidelines. Databases as well. You mentioned GFLI. Yes, we're also a member of GFLI, set up by the feed industry, recognizing the importance of getting this data or the individual feed ingredients into a database with really audited life cycle inventory data around those ingredients. Really important. So a very robust database. Likewise, Agri Footprint, another very good database. And over time, more and more ingredients, more and more data will be in those databases. That's typical in any data system. This will evolve. It'll become very precise, which is good news. And I think then you'll have this harmonization even more so, which will bring confidence into every aspect we talked about, whether it's on the finance side, the labeling side, and also, of course, for the farmer. And it's really important for the farmer to using this as a great business diagnostic to understand where he can make improvements business-wise, but also from a sustainability perspective.
So it's safe to say the agri-food world is fragmented. There's a lot of initiative, a lot of labeling, but there is clearly emerging a trend, a clear direction forward, linking the ESG from regulatory level down to the data infrastructure development, and then to the certifier labeling certification bodies and to consumers. And then indeed from the year and a half discussion on our platform, we do see this more and more clear direction forward. And then also clearly the parties need to work together. That also would be also for our discussion series to continue dive deeper into the subject. As a last word, I would like to ask either Bianca or Dick to conclude and to say a few words about what we're looking for when we start again in September.
Well, I think thank you, Tiffany, and then thank you, David, and thank you, Wilbert, for your great presentation. And I think the initiatives, my cat is moving around, and that is a problem. So here he is, and now you can all see him. So he's distracting me. Thank you very much for presenting. I think it is highly commendable what you're doing, because it needs to be done. Actually, a basic taxonomy and a data model should be a government issue. So that is what I'd like to stress. It's the private sector who's developing this. Now, indeed, how to bring it together and how to make it work together. And David, that is what you stressed. We're not the only one. We're not trying to dominate like Google wants. That is not our business. We want to collaborate. And that is what we'll continue to do in this series. So we'll talk about Planet Proof, which is another initiative. How are the data assured and how are they seeing their way forward? We are looking, and now Bianca, please help me out because I wasn't prepared for this question. We'll have another slaughterhouse, Goschalk, who was criticized for a scandal. And they will show what they are doing with AI in their slaughterhouse. So every potential risk is being logged on film. And how are they doing this? That'll be another one. And then after that, Bianca, please come in. You don't come in. That is what we'll do next. So after summer.
Yeah, that's it, Dick. There's no more after Goschalk at the moment.
There is no more after Goschalk, but those two are. Goschalk is really interesting. How to assure animal welfare slaughtering, and that is an issue. So I'd like to invite Lisanne from the Dierenbescherming, the Animal Welfare Society, to join us to see what is happening there. I think it's a very interesting session. And what we'll try to do is indeed have offline sessions talking about how really to bring it together. Because what we see is that everyone is working on something, but we aren't working really on it together. What surprises me is that the animal animal husbandry feed sector is much more advanced in developing standards than, for some reason, arable farming is. Well, there is an answer why that is happening, but it is curious and it is interesting to state that. So that is something we'll need to dive into as well.
So thank you, Dick and Bianca, and for everybody stayed and joined discussion. Thank you for your time, and please also continue to follow the Digital Food series, and have a great summer. Enjoy the nice weather, and I'll see you back in September.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you, David and Wilbur. Great discussion.